Zechariah was a priest of Israel, and he was married to Elizabeth. And as the priest, he would have been responsible for doing things that others were not allowed to do, and going places where others could not go. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies section of the temple, where traditionally the Ark of the Covenant was located. And because of these circumstances, they realized that when the priest was in the presence of such great holiness and such unfiltered power of God, something might potentially happen to them. But not anybody could go into the Holy of Holies. So they developed a plan where they tied a rope around the high priest's waist. And when he went into the Holy of Holies, if something happened to him and he were to faint or pass out, they grabbed the rope and pull him out. So when Zechariah is in this very special area, he receives a visit from the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel says to him that you and your wife Elizabeth are going to have a child. And this child will be a very great prophet, in the model of the Old Testament prophets, and a messenger who will herald the coming of a new kingdom. But Zechariah and his wife are both very old, and they do not have any children. They never have. And he, like most of us, is confused by this. And he debates Gabriel and says, but how is this supposed to be possible? And in response for that, Gabriel declares that Zechariah will become mute. And he will remain mute until the time that this child, who will be John the Baptist, is born. That might seem like somewhat of a harsh punishment for him. But as a priest of Israel, Zechariah is supposed to know his Bible and remember the stories of Abraham and Sarah, who, though they were old and without children, Sarah was able to conceive and give birth to a child. So the passage where Gabriel visits Zechariah in the temple ends with Zechariah being silent. 6 months later, Angel Gabriel goes to visit a young, unmarried woman who has been promised to a man named Joseph, and says to her that she is going to have an even more monumental task before her. And something is going to happen to her that has never happened to anyone else. Even though she has not known a man, she is going to conceive and bear a child. And this child will be the Son of God. And Mary is confused about this. But Gabriel gives her a little more leeway. And instead of ending that passage with silence, it ends with Mary's complete submission to God and to God's will. In the scripture that I just read, Mary's final words are, "Here am I, a servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Zechariah is skeptical. Zechariah debates. But Mary freely opens herself up to God, allowing her to be the one who will do this extraordinary and miraculous thing. The theological term for her is Theotokos, which means God-bearer. She is the one who will bear God within her flesh and bring this child into the world. And this will mean suffering and hardships for her, beginning probably with morning sickness, and then with labor pains, and then with seeing how other people will challenge her son and what they will do to him and how they will plot to try to overthrow him. Luke Timothy Johnson is a Roman Catholic Bible scholar, and in his commentary on the book of Luke, he sees this encounter between Mary and Gabriel as foreshadowing something that happens towards the end of Luke's gospel. Jesus has celebrated his last meal with his disciples. and he's retreated to the Garden of Gethsemane. And there he is waiting for the inevitable. And while the other disciples are waiting there and trying not to fall asleep, he prays anxiously to his heavenly Father. He knows what is about to befall him, about his betrayal, his arrest, the beatings, and the gruesome death. And he asks God, Heavenly Father, if there is any way at all, can this cup pass from me? Is there no other way that salvation can be obtained for humanity? And in English translations, there are commas and periods there. But I imagine long pauses as Jesus listens to something that only Jesus can hear. And then Jesus responds and says to his heavenly Father, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus empties himself and makes himself completely available to God's will, to perform God's greater purposes, even though it means he's going to have to endure all of this. And we see in this a reflection of Mary's prayer. Mary, who empties herself entirely to God and God's will, and says, let it be done with me and within me as God will have it, even though that's going to mean pain and suffering for Mary, all the way up to the very end. We can debate about who went through more emotional pain while Jesus was being crucified. Jesus himself while he was on the cross, or Mary as she witnesses this. But both of them have this very faithful prayer of complete self-emptying and surrender to God's will. Jesus in the garden prays that night to his heavenly Father, not my will, but yours be done. How did Jesus ever learn to pray that way? Perhaps his mother